Hello and welcome back to another episode of Pickleball Physio, a podcast where we talk about pickleball injury prevention and recovery, as well as health and wellness, so that pickleballers can get back on the court sooner and stay on the courts longer and ultimately play more games. I have a very special guest on with me today, Karin Ravalese, and I'm super excited for her to share more about the knowledge that I have since learned from her with all of you. Karin and I had the pleasure of meeting through a business program, a challenge that we were in together, and have continued this relationship over the past few months. And she has been very, very insightful on some of the misconceptions or myths that come around the realm of stretching and breathing, and a lot of the information that comes from that I found can be very beneficial to pickleball athletes. And so I'm very excited to have Karin on. She comes from Wethersfield, Connecticut, and she has a background in physical education and human performance, as well as exercise physiology. And this is one of the reasons why what she has to share with us today is going to be very important, because it gets down into the nitty gritty of the systems and understanding exactly how the body works in the organism that we are, beautifully complex, but also needing a little bit of help now and then. Welcome, Karin. Thank you so much for coming on to Pickleball Physio today.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much for asking me. I really appreciate it.
So can you please share a little bit more of your story on your background and how you started coming into what you're looking at now more? I know that you have a background in neurokinetic therapy and breathing and movement, as well as immaculate dissection. And for the large majority of the population, most of us have no idea what that is. So can you share with us a little bit more on kind of that journey that you had to discover these things and start practicing in this realm?
Sure. I'm just going to kind of start from the beginning. When I started taking martial arts, I was so interested in that. I really just loved it. So I wanted to learn more. So I, went back to school to learn a little bit more about physical education. I was getting involved in doing that. Years passed, with training, and I started getting involved with some weight training. I wanted to go for a certification. As I was going through the certification, I was like, my neck was really starting to kill me. I had some, other coaches just kind of taking a look at it, and, everybody was saying everything was fine. What happened was someone that I knew actually had referred me to someone in New York City, a chiropractor, but she was more like a functional movement specialist. She's an anatomist by trade. I remember going to see her and saying to her, hey, I actually went for a run and I noticed that, my neck was bothering me, which I thought was very weird, because here I'm running, why would my neck hurt? And she's like, that's not weird at all, because there's this huge connection. And she just kind of like started talking to me about it. And I remember thinking, wow, I was like very fascinated with it. The rest was kind of history. I started studying under her. She has her own seminar series, which is immaculate dissection. She's also teaches for neurokinetic therapy. So I had gotten involved, learning more about how the body works. It wasn't until I really started doing a little bit of a deeper dive on the anatomy and really putting it into my own body and, having some compensatory movement patterns that I had, is when it really started to open the door for me. And I felt like I really could start making some headway in my training, dying down some of that tension and pain I had. Because even, just the stress of it sometimes, like, what am I doing wrong? That's enough to kind of, aggravate the situation.
Of course.
So.
Absolutely. And so with that kind of leading up to it, that got you into learning about it yourself, because it was something you were experiencing as well. So then how did you start transitioning now to helping people combat all of this, aches, pains, and other factors that come with breath work and with these compensatory patterns?
Well, just, listening to what people had to say, giving them like a different alternative, or just asking like, hey, have you ever, remember being a baby? Have you ever seen like a baby stretch? Have you ever seen a baby do sit-ups, things like that? And, a lot of people would be like, no, actually, come to think of it, I haven't. So it just really got me to kind of like take a step back, and maybe I have to kind of work on some of these things. Like I don't have to stop doing what I was doing. I mean,
Right.
if I loved, lifting weights, or I loved doing martial arts, I didn't have to stop doing it. So it was like, now it gave me some other things that I could maybe kind of be doing on the sidelines, like, taking a look at how I was breathing, like kind of starting back from the beginning, like what the baby did on the back. The baby goes on his back and it does some supine breathing. And then to be able to build the strong curve in our neck and our back, so we can hold our head up, because I feel like a lot of times we lose our ability to hold our head up now with all our
Yes.
devices
Yes.
and phones and things like that. So I just really changed the way I trained and the way I thought. It just had been extremely helpful for me, talking to some other people about it that were experiencing some of the same issues, or, maybe they weren't exercising, and, they weren't exercising, or because they just felt was just kind of kickstarting them a little bit, starting off with the breathing and through the core, because the core and the thoracic diaphragm, they work together. So just kind of starting there and then building on that with someone, and not just feeling like they have to go from 0 to 60.
Absolutely. Yeah, that completely makes sense. And it's fascinating because a lot of us don't think about breathing because we just do it. But a lot of, like you said, with the way that we live our lives now and in our environment and with our devices, it changes the way that we're able to breathe efficiently. So let's talk briefly about some of the problems that happen when you're not breathing well. I know that we've talked, you and I, about sinuses and about grinding of teeth and all these things. Can you share a little bit more on some of the problems that we end up seeing as a result from not breathing correctly?
Yes, definitely. If we're breathing through our mouth, like sometimes we don't realize that we could have like our mouth like slightly open during the day. That actually like can cause nasal congestion, because you're not being, the more you're breathing through your nose, it actually decongest your nose. So I've had a lot of people tell me, well, I can't breathe through my nose. I have to breathe through my mouth because I'll die. And I'm like, no, you actually won't. You actually won't. Like the more you do it, the more it's going to loosen up, just trying to keep the tongue posture. Like these are all the tongue on the roof of your mouth. Like I never like knew about that until I started
Right.
learning about it. I mean, it was just like, I couldn't believe it. When I even started myself one time, I remember just walking when I was working in the insurance company. I was walking from the place to the parking lot, the garage. It was maybe like a 10-minute walk or so. And I said, well, I'm just going to keep my mouth closed and put my tongue on the roof of my mouth just to see, because I thought to myself, I probably doing that anyways. And sure enough, I was like, oh my God, it was hard. It was kind of like challenging for me. And I was like, oh no, we can't even have this, like the more I was like
Mhm.
learning about it. So the more I consistently, made them, being mindful about it, I could change it.
Mhm.
So that helped, and it just being on autopilot during the day kind of helps when I sleep, because when we're
Yeah.
sleeping, we don't really know what we're doing. And that's when sometimes you might wake up with a dry mouth, or, we might be more prone to infections and stuff like that, making it more challenging for us to want to work out, especially with your pickleball community. And when they
Right.
get back to their work, their exercise, they don't want like something like a sore throat, or congestion to slow them down. So,
Right.
being mindful of that from the start is would help.
And so with, breathing through our nose, if we're not breathing through our nose, then our nose will naturally just kind of allow things to just, gather there and get
Mhm.
bogged down there because you don't have the constant airway coming through. And so is that one of the reasons why we're seeing more people getting into like mouth tape or nasal strips to kind of help with their sleeping on that unconscious level when they're not able to be aware of their mouth and their tongue posture?
Absolutely. Actually, I sleep with mouth tape on myself. It's funny because I can always tell, like, if I've eaten too much food the night before, or if maybe I was a little bit more stressed before I went to bed, and I didn't kind of like try to do some strategies that I have to kind of set my body, for sleep. I'll notice the tape will be a little bit like it'll still be on there, but it'll be all like crunched up, so
Hmm.
it's actually to the point now where it's like a really good feedback for me. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like I can go back and I could say, what can I do to help myself like the next time around? I think that's really important, especially nowadays.
Hmm.
We to have some strategies in place to help ourselves, rather than
Definitely.
feeling like we have to run to the doctor, or maybe there is a time we do need the doctor. And, the appointment sometimes could be hard to get in. So if you have like a couple things you can do to be less
Yeah.
aggravation to you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And especially because, as pickleballers, we want to do everything we can to enhance our game. And a lot of us focus more on the time we spend on the court, but this is just another testament to strategies that you could be doing off court that could be benefiting you. Because I use mouth tape too, and I
Mhm.
definitely notice I have more energy in the morning. I feel less dehydrated because, we sweat a lot and we lose a lot of water when we're sleeping. And breathing out of our mouths can definitely dehydrate us in that way too. And so that dry mouth sensation I don't experience anymore with the mouth tape on. But like even with exercising, then you would still want to be exercising with your mouth closed too, because I know a lot of people will be like, panting or trying to take deep breaths. There's different strategies that some people have used for breathing in your nose, out your mouth, and stuff like that when they're exercising. What are some of the appropriate or less appropriate times that actually comes into play?
There's a lot of, there's debate on that. Like I know some people are like all nasal, and then there's nasal and mouth. And I think it depends on the activity that you're doing. So if you're really going hard or something, I mean, I would say definitely breathe in through your nose, but
Hmm.
if to exhale through your mouth is not, I don't see that being a problem. I'll exhale through my mouth, but I will try to like really encourage, more nasal breathing, like myself personally.
Hmm.
So usually what I'll do with that is I'll try to like, if I feel like I'm getting tired or something, like maybe slow down the activity and try to get your breathing a little bit under control, just like
Right.
don't try to take in like these huge breaths, sometimes, because that kind of can even defeat the purpose too, even if you are breathing through your nose. So just try
Right.
to relax, like try to relax yourself, kind of train yourself. I mean, you could take a moment, you could put your hands on your hips, I mean, on your knees, like if you feel like you have to stop, sometimes the pickleball, like don't do any of this, when you're
Right.
trying to like recover, like, maybe just get like almost like in a squat or position, or like a hips back deadlift more so, and then just kind of put your hands on your knees and then just try to calm your breathing that way, inhaling and exhaling through your nose, or you can exhale through your mouth.
Yeah.
Um,
Can you talk a little bit more on why that posturing and what those components are that create a quality breath?
do you mean like the nasal
Like,
breathing? Or do you mean?
like in the sense of like not hunching over, right? So instead of when you're hunching over, that's less desired than, kind of coming down into a squat. Can you talk more about why those components matter and what you're trying to encourage in those postures?
Yes, exactly. That's great. Thanks for asking that. Well, you're keeping yourself in nice alignment. So you're kind of you're keeping your posture. You're not like, not one part is getting more stress than the other. Your muscle, the diaphragm, right? That's our primary muscle of breathing, actually gets its juice or gas from your neck. So if you're kind of going over like this, you're actually compressing down on, the supply to your diaphragm. So it's like
Mm,
really important to kind of keep your like if you were to have uh your ears a little bit over your shoulder, like rather than you don't want your ears to come over
board.
like this,
Right.
so just, trying to be mindful of that, because sometimes, we don't realize that we're doing this.
Right.
And some of the positions that we put ourselves in, can actually, hinder us. And then, when you start to get tired, that's when we have these chances of going into our default mode, so maybe just slowing it down a little bit, or sometimes that's what you have to do. We have to slow it down, and
Yeah.
we don't like that. We never like
No,
that,
the
right?
majority of us live in a very fast-paced environment, so slowing down feels like
Mhm.
completely foreign to so many of us. And that being said, it can be challenging to try to implement any sort of program where you're warming up, or you're doing breath work,
Mhm.
or you're doing anything that helps to prime your body or even help your body wind down. A common thing that we do a lot whenever we think about sports is stretching. And a lot of times in stretching, we will often stretch because we feel tight. But in our conversation and in some of the messages that we've exchanged to each other, you were sharing with me that tightness doesn't necessarily always mean you should stretch. So
Mhm.
this is something that we have very high in priority in our mind is, oh, when it's tight, then we stretch it out. But can you tell us a little bit more what you mean when you say tightness doesn't always necessarily mean stretching or
Yes,
require stretching?
yes, exactly. This is really important because sometimes when you're tight, it's like it's trying to create stability for you. You don't want to be stretching something unless you replace it with something else. So if this tight item, like let's take the hamstrings, for example,
Right.
really,
Very
really
common
tight hamstrings.
injury.
Yes, that's very common. Most people are like, oh my God, my hamstrings are so tight. They're so tight, I can't stand it. And then they're stretching. But a lot of times, sometimes that feeling that person's feeling is the hamstrings are tight because they're trying to stabilize you. They're trying to prevent your low back from going out on you, you know.
Mhm.
My mentor that I mentioned to you about earlier, Kathy Dooley,
Right.
Dr. Kathy Dooley, she described it as it being like a reins on a horse trying
Mm,
to stop you, like from going into like a disc problem, having a disc issue, disc
right.
herniation. If you have your hamstrings trying to protect your low back and you're stretching, 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 now you may be able to, now you're not, now you're going to, you could potentially end up with a back problem.
Right.
It's important to think of that. So a lot of the things that I've learned in immaculate dissection is we have these things that we call pendulums. So it's very similar to I don't know if you've heard of PNF. You
Yes.
stretch, you contract, and then you stretch, you contract, and you contract. So sometimes maybe the best thing to do is kind of shorten the tissue and then lengthen the tissue. And then this way it's able to go through its proper ranges of motion and it's
Right.
not stuck in one position at a time. Because I
Right.
think that's sometimes with the stretching, where we can keep getting ourselves stuck in that position where it's already on stretch.
Right.
So you're like stretching it more. So sometimes you might have to shorten the tissue
Mhm.
and then, kind of, and which seems really odd because people are like, oh my God, I don't want to shorten it because
Then it'll be tight.
it's going to kill me. And,
Right.
and you do get that like stretch, like when you're stretching, like momentarily, even if it's on stretch, like you get that relief, but
Mhm.
it never goes away. Like it's a momentarily thing. That's when sometimes we have to take a look and say, gee, like if it's not getting any better, like why am I going to continue to keep doing the same thing over and over again? And,
Right.
and that's kind of like where I was at with my own self. I was
Mhm.
getting frustrated because I'm like, what is the problem here? Like I had all these good intentions on, wanting to do all these things. It wasn't like I didn't try and I'm sure so many
Yeah.
people feel that way. They're like, God, why do I keep hurting my back? Or why does my neck kill me all the time? Like I'm doing everything right. Like I'm going to pickleball all the time. I'm lifting weights with a trainer, I'm
Mhm.
doing everything. I'm eating right. I'm doing all these things, but I still feel like crap. That's when sometimes it's like, okay, well, let's take a look at how you're breathing. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Because like if that's off, a lot of things are going to be off. And it sucks to hear that because you're like, are you kidding me?
Right.
I
Yeah, we
breathe. I
never
am
we never want to
breathing.
get to like we never want to
Yes.
get to like 50 years old and be told like, "Oh, you've been breathing wrong your entire life." Like it doesn't feel very great. But I agree with, you're stretching not with the intent necessarily of just gaining flexibility. You're stretching with the intent of trying to gain a stable, controlled motion, and that's where that PNF comes in, those techniques of engaging those muscles, because muscles are contractile tissues. And so, for our listeners and our viewers, when you have contractile tissues that are clinging on for dear life, they can't work efficiently throughout the full extent that they're meant to interact with one another. Like Karin was sharing, this implementation of actually building that stability through those muscle groups like the hamstrings, the tightness doesn't necessarily tight because it, needs to be lengthened. It's tight because it needs to find that stability. And a large portion of that comes from coordinating your breath and coordinating that core stability and support, which could be one of the reasons why we have so many low back issues or hamstring issues, because the hamstrings are trying to make up for what the core, the diaphragm, and the breath is not supplying for the back, even though it's literally in the same zone, from the back to where we're breathing. So, how is there a way that people can kind of start assessing the way they're breathing and maybe do a quick check on themselves to say like, oh, like I could use some work on my breath work? Like, what is something that people can maybe start noticing about the way that they breathe right now to help see if they are getting efficient breaths, and
Yeah,
maybe a
no,
couple of strategies that they can start improving their breaths?
great question. I love that, because when you do bring this to people's attention, they're like, oh my God, I actually do that.
Right.
What I see too, and probably a lot of people could relate, is the pulling of the rib cage up, like, the raising of the shoulders, or feeling that they have to do that, like that
Mhm.
they have to pull the rib cage up. What they want to be mindful of is try to relax the shoulders, but that the breath needs to come from, they call this the costal margin, which is like your rib cage and stuff like that. And
Right.
right over here on the at the top. And then like if you were to just kind of
Right
put
here.
your thumb and then your pinky and just kind of hold your hands here,
Oop.
like
So
right here.
like,
Yeah,
there we
right
go.
here in the center. Yep. And
Okay.
you're just gonna take a nice inhale through your nose and see if you want that to expand. See how that expanded? And I see that yours is, that's
Right.
great. And
I've
then
been
when you,
working on it.
yeah, it looks good. And then when you exhale, it should kind of come in like our six pack. Everybody wants the
Mhm.
six pack and stuff. So you want to inhale, so you want it to kind of widen a little bit. And then when you exhale, you want it to kind of come back in. And you don't want like a lot of pulling up here. I mean,
Right.
it's gonna expand a little bit when you breathe, and it's
Yeah.
because of the lungs, because there's like it's creating a vacuum because of the pressure differences when that happens. So the air is going to go into the lungs when you breathe, so you will see a little bit of it kind of going, and that's normal breathing. But you don't want to have like excessive like pulling
Right.
up, because then that means that you're using your neck muscles to help you breathe. When you use your neck muscles to help you breathe, then they're not really available for the movement. And
Right.
that's how you end up with the neck pain, the tight neck, and not good range of motion. You can't turn your head. You need to be able to turn your head when you're playing pickleball, right? Because,
Absolutely.
you can lose a shot there. So not only are you restricting your movement of your neck, you're also causing potential issue for the diaphragm to be able to actually get its gas, because
Mhm.
like I had said earlier, it's in these segments, in the cervical spine. That's another thing to even kind of consider. Like we don't even really think about this stuff. I mean, why would
Yeah.
we don't need to, but it's just that can, shed some light on why someone may be having these feelings, these experiences because of that type of stuff. So
Yeah. So, for those of you listening, if you're in a place that you can take your hands and set them on your rib cage, your lower rib cage, and experiment with some of these breaths to see if you get that expansion out through your hands or under your hands rather than up at the upper portion of your chest. Give that a try and experiment with it, and see if you can maybe shift the proportional expansion away from your chest and into those lower rib cage areas, because our lungs take up a lot of space of that upper chest area, and we want to be able to help all of that fill, and be able to fully exhale, adequately. So is it safe to say then, Karen, that anytime we start any sort of activity or program or treatment or intervention, we should probably be, whittling it down and going back to the basics of breathing right from the get-go? Or is this something that people would think about later on if other things aren't working?
I definitely would encourage starting your workout first with it. I do
Hmm.
every workout I do. I supine 90, which I get on my back. Then I also go like a crocodile breathing, the prone. I always do that. And it's not like it's a big investment on people to think that they have to be breathing for like 20 minutes. Like sometimes a lot of people, when they stretch, they feel that they have to go through this 20-minute stretch routine and stuff. And but I definitely would, encourage, like, even if it was like 1 minute of each, 1 minute on the back, maybe 1 minute in the crocodile position or the prone position. See how you feel. Like check in with yourself. Like you might notice that, oh wow, I feel a little bit more relaxed. I don't feel as tight, or I don't feel as stressed or something. Because sometimes when we are tight, or we have pain or discomfort, that can cause stress too. You're playing the game and you want to play the game, or maybe you're playing for the competition or something, and the whole stress of even all of that will even kind of tighten us up. So we want to, we can just kind of take a moment and just take a couple quick breaths and go about our business.
It's a simple enough strategy that you can start implementing very early on and kind of reward yourself every time you think of it to give it a try and to go through it again. I know we've been talking about how breath work affects, a lot of those motions. It affects staving off some of the tightness and helping to support the core and such. We've talked about how it helps with sleeping and with energy, but I also know that there's a huge benefit and a link to digestion as well. Can you talk a little bit about the connection there too?
Oh yeah, definitely. I love talking about this stuff.
It's all great stuff.
I know it is. Well, the thoracic diaphragm, as I had mentioned before, which is, our primary muscle of breathing. It has holes which we call hiatuses. And one of the holes of the hiatuses has the esophagus. So, and the vagus nerve, of course. So for those that don't, did you want me to talk a little bit about the vagus nerve?
Please.
Okay. The vagus nerve basically is responsible for the majority of like our rest and digest function, which we call parasympathetics. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard of sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, and stuff like that. So the vagus nerve and the esophagus run through a particular area in the diaphragm. If the diaphragm's not able to go through its proper ranges of motion, like it's stuck, just like the hamstring might be stuck, same thing, no different. Right. It could put like a lot of pressure on the esophagus, so it'll mess with your digestion. You might feel like some acid might start going back up to the throat because it's kind of like stuck, it doesn't know where to go. And then with having the vagus nerve there, putting kind of compression on that, could really start affecting all the visceral, all the organs, like your liver, your spleen, your pancreas, your stomach, intestine, small intestines, large intestines. So like if people are having like some kind of like digestion issues coupled with like all this tightness, discomfort, that's another indication like, oh, gee, maybe someone's having a little bit of a tough time, breathing, or, maybe they've got some stress in their life too. So who doesn't have stress in their life, right? No one's getting a free pass there.
Oh yeah, no way.
So, I just found it like, to me, I just thought I loved it. I thought it was so interesting when I started like learning about this stuff. I was like, wow, this is so cool, because a lot of times when people are talking or like, and I've had people tell me this, like, they go to a doctor and they're telling the doctor their stuff. And, sometimes they're like looking at them like they make them feel like they're crazy or something, and I don't agree with that. I feel like there's an answer, there's always an answer. And I believe that your body is genius. I feel like it tells you exactly what's wrong with it. And sometimes we just want it to stop. Right. Sometimes we do things that are just the complete opposite of what we need. So it's just really kind of like thinking about that, maybe looking at things a little differently. You don't have to do it. I mean, and it's okay if you don't. Right. But it's kind of comforting in a way when you know that there's like an answer. It's when you have an answer. It's so defeating and so frustrating, especially if you have all the good intentions of wanting to and wanting to exercise, like like your pickleball community here.
I agree. And it's another testament to how beautifully complex our body is, but all the ways that we overcomplicate for it to work the way that it's meant to. And like you said, that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight freeze response versus parasympathetic, that's more rest and digest. It's a common misconception that you're have to be in one for a period of time and then you have to be in the other for a period of time. You can kind of fluctuate between the two in kind of a more optimal window. and accessing that through our breath can be a really handy tool for us, even on the pickleball courts. Because if you can, in the middle of a play, be able to regulate that, it could be the make or break of that point that you score if you are able to kind of help moderate that. And that's why you'll see a lot of athletes, professional athletes, as well, do a lot of sort of visualization, meditative breath works type stuff, because they're getting the benefits of all of that for the sake of their game. And even if you're not as active as a competitor as the pros are out there, you are still an athlete, and your body is still required to do some amazing things. So I encourage all of you listeners and viewers to give some of these strategies a try, and see if they make a difference for you. And it's not going to be easy first time around. Karin even said so herself, right, when she was walking, just keeping her lips shut. It was tough for even just for those 10 minutes. So if it is a little bit of a challenge, then that probably means you need it. And so, but obviously start small and kind of build up into it. Don't try to be like breathing for 5 hours with your lips closed if you can only handle 5 minutes at a time.
Definitely.
Yes.
Don't put the tape on maybe right away, especially if you feel like, because sometimes when people hear that, they're like, oh my God, I cannot tape in my mouth, or
right.
like that.
I'm
That's
gonna
fine.
Inhale it on accident, or no, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah, that won't happen. You'll definitely wake yourself up.
Yeah.
You definitely wake yourself up. That's for sure.
Yeah. The body is always ready to be sending us these signals and these informational pieces. And so give it a chance to dialogue with you and see maybe what you haven't been paying attention to so far. And if you have questions, you have access to resources. That clarity from having answers, like Karin mentioned, is super handy. And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions coming from this podcast specifically on, breath work and things that people can do. So if people are wanting to ask more questions or follow up with you, where can they find you? How can they get in touch with you and see more of what you're doing?
Oh, they could definitely send me an email. My email is krav7@icloud.com. Feel free to send me an email, ask me any questions. I'd be happy to talk to you. I'm on Facebook. Karin Ravalese is my profile, and me and my sister, actually, who's a registered dietitian,
Yes.
she's a Healing Heart Nutrition, and so she's you can also find information on her page as well, Cheryl Ravalese Magipinto at Healing Heart Nutrition.
Awesome. And they're doing some amazing stuff and tying together these pillars of our health. So I'm really excited to be connecting with Karin and being able to continue sharing all of these tools that we have at our fingertips or literally within our own bodies. And so all of this information for reaching out to Karin will be in the description and the show notes. And I'll have links for you to be able to click right on over and get in touch with her as well. But for the meantime, thank you so much, Karin, for coming on to Pickleball Physio. I'm really excited about this information, and I'm really hopeful that it's going to help change the game for a lot of people, not only on the courts, but also for their health off the courts. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, no problem. And Sarah, I just want to tell you this really quick too.
Please do.
I just wanted to mention, I should have probably talked about Revolt and Move. If they want to find that on Facebook too, they could feel free to go ahead and send me a friend request on there, because I set up another page
awesome.
specifically for that. So if anybody wanted to talk about it, I'd be happy to answer questions.
And I'll include that link also in the description below, so that nobody has any excuses not to find you or reach out to you through this podcast. But thank you again, Karin. I'm sure we'll have you on the podcast again as more specific questions come up. But until then, thank you everybody for listening and tuning in to Pickleball Physio Podcast. Hope to see you guys on the courts.
Bye.